What ended up leading you to starting the brand?
So I started the brand in law school. I was about halfway through, well, two-thirds of the way through law school. I had been making shaving soap for myself. I had found the fragrances in the wet that existed in the wet shaving world at the time to be, they weren't really for me. And so I was making soap for myself, and I sent it out to a number of people just to get their feedback and kind of see if they had any notes. And I got some excellent feedback from members of the Reddit community. And so in that, I think it was November of 2012, I got notice that I had been selected for an internship, a legal internship in San Francisco. And like many legal internships then and now, it was unpaid. And I needed something to pay my living expenses at the time. So I launched the brand that following March. And my parents were kind enough to kind of go in on it with me. They had been bakers when I was a kid. They were professional bakers. And so they still had a lot of the equipment. They still had the facilities and whatnot. And so I brought the operation back to upstate New York from Boston. And it's been here kind of ever since.
And you shared something during our last conversation that was so interesting to me because I've looked at testing this out with clients. We've never really taken a full dive into it, but you shared that Reddit has been your primary or basically your main online channel for growth. What led you to test that out? Were you already active on Reddit before you started the brand?
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was basically an organic kind of outgrowth. I had gotten into wet shaving through Reddit's Wicked Edge community, which at the time was like 7,000 people. I think it's now pushing like 300 or 400,000. I mean, the growth has been tremendous. And actually the sub has split a couple of times. But I had gotten into wet shaving. I don't actually remember how I found it through Reddit, but I got involved in the community. I was asking questions. I was doing all kinds of things. And so it was just sort of the outgrowth of the activity that already existed on that channel.
And do you have like one specific, it sounds like you started one specific community
Hmm.
for it,
Hmm.
but have you since then said, hey, Reddit is doing great for me. I need to try to find other subreddits or other communities that are working, or have you really stayed tight to that one?
We looked into Facebook, trying to navigate the internal like group architecture and the weird kind of cross politics that exist in hobby and niche groups like this proved to be an unproductive use of my time.
Hmm.
And so what I ended up doing was I basically withdrew from most of the Facebook groups, and have largely retired from the Facebook wet shaving community, largely because there's a lot of personal interplay and a lot of politics that really just sort of make it difficult to get any kind of clear message to anybody.
Hmm.
And no matter what you say, like there's going to be very active discussion in a way that doesn't really proceed through Reddit for reasons that I'm not entirely clear on. Uh,
Yeah, and let me ask that question in a different way. So you have the subreddit that you started on, which I think was just what r/wet shaving or
r
something
slash
like that.
Wicked Edge.
Okay. Since you've, started with that one, you've seen it performing well. Have you looked for other subreddits within Reddit that you could branch out to get your message out?
So it's largely been the result of kind of how the wet shaving world has developed on its own. Wicked Edge was the original subreddit. That was not my creation.
Hmm.
That already existed when I got into wet shaving. As I said, there were maybe 7,000 subscribers at the time. A couple of years later, there were interpersonal differences between the moderators of the subreddit, and so it split. And a new subreddit was created called, I think it was Wet Shavers. I mean, like they all kind of follow sort of the same basic procedure, and so it can be a little difficult to keep which one came first straight. Um, but so the subreddit split, and so I straddled the line, and I would put content in both subreddits. As Wicked Edge has grown, it's become a lot more difficult to make myself heard over the noise. Basically, if you have two, three, 400,000 people all talking at the same time, and it's not a very heavily moderated subreddit, so it's just kind of an absolute stream of consciousness.
Hmm.
The wet shaving subreddit, which is the one on which I'm more active these days, is much more heavily moderated and much more carefully managed. That one I think is still 150,000 subscribers or such. It's still quite large. It's a very big
Hmm.
forum, and it's a lot easier to get through there. So largely by virtue of how the community developed around the industry, I have kind of followed where people are talking about the product.
And you'd almost say that, if I'm hearing you correctly, the larger Reddit community is more difficult, right? So you're gravitating more towards the 150,000 versus the 400,000 just because it's easier to reach people properly. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, because of the lack of serious moderation on Wicked Edge,
Gotcha.
it has long been a hands-off style subreddit, and so it's basically
Hmm.
a giant bulletin board. And you look at a bulletin board that's covered in 1,000 pieces of paper, and not really any of them stands out. So wet shaving itself is much easier to communicate with people through, and it's a much more structured and moderated and managed sub.
Yeah, and that brings up a question I have because, like I said, as an agency, we've dabbled in the idea. Like, I'll give you an example. We were working with a clothing brand, and we knew they had a sale coming up. So I just wanted to see, because I use Reddit, outside of work, what we could potentially do for Reddit. There's a subreddit called Frugal Male Fashion,
Mm-hmm. Yep, I
and
remember it well.
yeah, and there's I think 1 million+ people that follow it. There's quite a bit of people. They're very closely moderated to where like any hint of promotional content or anything like that gets taken down, right? So my question for you is, as you're engaging with the community, are you putting out links to your website? Like, are you sharing updates about your product? Or are you
Mhm.
really just like educating and speaking from the voice of a customer versus are you speaking from the voice of a brand owner? Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, like I, I no longer engage with the community as I did before I founded Barrister and Man.
Okay.
My feeling has long been that interacting with other brands from the perspective of a customer is untoward, because
Defi-
it
Define that
is
for me.
unprofessional. And
Okay.
my logic there is that somebody could easily, like, say I say something critical of some brand, and I mean, like, I was going to say regardless of whether it's true or not, but I would like to think that I would not just recklessly throw that information around.
Yeah.
But someone who disagrees with me, because cults of personality exist very heavily in niche industries like this, someone who disagrees with me or doesn't like me or really likes the person who's running that brand might claim, well, your comment is not legitimate because you have something to gain because you technically compete with that person. And so that's something of which I've always been very aware, and I have always really tried to respect that line. Um, and so I basically, as soon as I started the company and it began to grow, I pretty much I shifted how I interacted with the community, and um, I no longer interact with people who exist in the wet shaving world from the perspective of anything other than a brand owner. So, but I do post a lot of content. I post a lot of educational stuff. It's very organic. Like, I don't really have a lot of structure to it. For some years, I posted fragrance reviews and various other things. But nowadays, it's a less formal process and a less structured process. Often every Tuesday, because of the way the schedule for the subreddit is structured, I will post new announcements, new products. I'll put links on those posts. People can come check our website. They can do whatever. Like yesterday, I put up our Q4 release schedule. People ask for a release schedule so that they can plan what they want to buy and when, and especially during the holidays, what they can ask for. So
Mhm.
so I put that up yesterday because every Tuesday and Saturday they do this post where it's what they call a deals and new products thread, and vendors are invited to take part in that on Tuesdays. So, but also, like, if people have questions about soap chemistry, if people have questions about fragrance, if people have questions about the history of the community, all of those things are things that I'll just sort of stop and chime in on.
Yeah. And you've been doing this for how many years on Reddit, specifically with the brand?
10 years. It was 10
Okay.
years this past March.
Have you come to a point where you have expected level of engagement or metrics or anything as you're posting on Reddit threads, as you're putting out comments, or is it kind of more so just focused on engaging with the community and then the sales will come? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, it's really more about engaging with the community. Reddit's metric capability, at least for people in my position, is not fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, much of the information that I receive is in the form of, this number of people upvoted, this number of people downvoted, this number of people reported you, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen that frequently, but, whatever.
Yeah.
But really, my feeling is that the human element is a much more valuable thing than trying to curate this content in such a way as to maximize engagement. It's much
Mm-hmm.
more important to me that it still be apparent to people who use my product that I'm still very much, regardless of how I interact with them, I'm still very much part of their community. And
Mm-hmm.
that I have said to them, to their community at large several times, that I consider Reddit to be home.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to me that there be a much more organic human character than something that might come with attempting to optimize for engagement.
Okay. No, I love that. And have you tried Reddit ads? Like, is that something that has any value comparative to like the organic?
I haven't.
Okay.
My experience with just sort of, down in the trenches PPC style ads is that I don't have the cash to really make them do much.
Gotcha. Okay.
You need a fair bit of capital to, especially for something niche like this, where it's, you have to convince people that you're right and then get them to buy it.
Mm.
And people don't like to shave, and it's sort of people didn't like to shave before it was mandated by the U.S. Army, and then it was just sort of a par for the course kind of thing. Everybody was shaving because everybody had been clean shaven, because that was how you got a good seal on a gas mask in the First World War. And that's why shaving was made mandatory in the United States Armed Forces. I don't know that that's true anywhere else, but that's where it came from. But like I said, people don't enjoy shaving. I mean, like, you have a beard. And what we've found is that PPC is just, it's too sterile. You really need something where people can engage. You need something that speaks to people. Just a Reddit ad that just kind of goes by, people just glaze over. And we found the same thing with Facebook and Instagram as well. We found that banner ads and just classic PPC style ads just were not beneficial for us. We were just throwing good money after bad.
Interesting. And I think, so we do ad creative. So one thing I would counter to that or ask would be, we use Reddit for, like, when we work with clients for customer research, because Reddit can get pretty unfiltered, positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on the positive first. Have you ever tried, or do you ever use the insights you gain from Reddit and the conversations to guide either your product development or your messaging with your product
Oh,
on your
absolutely.
website? Yeah.
Absolutely. So once again, the nature of a hobby industry and a small company like us is that you end up being very close to your clients.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of barrier. A lot of people will email me directly. A lot of people will send me messages directly. And so there's very much like a back and forth between all of us. And I take a lot of notice when people want something, not either from us or from the wet shaving world at large. And by that same token, if people have criticism and I begin to see it come through a lot on Reddit, then I'll take note of that as well. That's also true of Facebook to a certain extent, because we do, still maintain a Facebook page and an Instagram page and whatnot. But really, the much more organic conversation comes through Reddit and from various wet shaving fora, all of which are much smaller, more insular places. But I mean, like, I try to keep an eye on them as well, even though I don't engage with them very much.
Yeah, and so the positive can bring, messaging refinement, things like that. Reddit can be very unfiltered as well. I have a thought or a theory, which I would love to double back to what you said on conversation not going anywhere fruitful on Facebook with the
Hmm.
groups that way. My theory or my thought with Reddit is that there's a level of anonymity, if I'm saying that word right,
Hmm.
anonymity
Yep.
with profile and stuff to where people can feel they can go above and beyond to say whatever they're thinking completely, even like intrusive thoughts that you normally wouldn't share.
Hmm.
Do you find that ever that there's like a bit of negative feedback on there, and how do you deal with that?
Truthfully, the angriest, most vicious messages I have ever received have all come in
Hmm.
through Facebook.
Interesting.
I have
Okay.
heard I've heard that critique of Reddit before, that anonymity frees people to be their worst selves.
Hmm.
In truth, I have never experienced that phenomenon. All of these strange witch hunts and various other things that have come from occasionally controversial things that I do, not deliberately, but I occasionally make a controversial fragrance or whatnot.
Hmm.
Um, all of the really angry complaints that I have ever received have all come through Facebook or through email. And people, I mean, they sign their names.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Facebook, like Facebook groups or just Facebook comments or
Kind of both. Facebook
okay.
comments, Facebook groups, direct messages. Honestly, like, because I am most of the public face of the company, a lot of it gets very personal very fast.
Mhm.
And I've heard people say, well, you just need to be thicker skinned. And that way it may well be true. But part of being thicker skinned is maybe putting a little distance between yourself and the people who buy your product. Because sometimes on either side, you can end up taking it a little too seriously.
Do they sorry I'm asking so many questions here, but I'm
No, it's
trying to
fine.
get to a point of who your customer is. Are they doing this on like the comments or are they doing like DMs?
Both. Both.
Okay. I have a theory. Some Facebook users just like you ever see like the 50, 60 plus year old man that comments on a female's picture, like a
Mhm.
comment that makes you think he probably doesn't realize that everybody sees this right now. Like maybe he doesn't understand that Facebook, everybody can see this comment. So I don't know if it's your target demographic or not, but
It actually isn't. Most of our target demographic is people between the ages of like 25 and 44.
okay.
So people who are young enough to know better.
Very cool. Yeah. Young enough to know better. Perfect. And, for anybody in the e-com space that is thinking about starting Reddit and not from a paid perspective, but just engaging with Reddit communities, let's say they're in the firearms product space or something like that, that can be very niched, right?
Mhm.
What advice would you give to make sure they can make the most of the platform?
Know your audience. People will know if you have an agenda. People will know if you have an angle. And they don't necessarily, you're not necessarily going to be discounted just because you have a product to sell. But at
Mhm.
least in the wet shaving space, if you come in and your only contribution or your only discussion or your only engagement with a conversation is to promote your own product or to promote yourself in some way, people look unkindly on that.
Mhm.
And so the best thing you can do is just to be a person. And if you want to market to a community and you want to understand a community, be a part of that community before you do
Mhm.
anything else. Like, understand who you're talking to, ingratiate yourself, like, not in like a weird artificial, like, pickup artist kind of way, but
Yeah.
just talk to them like people, because that's what they are. And if it's a very rewarding experience to engage with your customers. I mean, like, sometimes you get people who are maybe a little unpleasant to deal with, but a lot of times you get feedback faster and less expensively than you ever could otherwise. And often you get unvarnished feedback, as you said. But people have to trust you, and they have to trust that you're not just coming to them trying to make a buck. And
Mhm.
so the best thing that you can do, even if, and the best thing that you can do is be upfront about your position. Be like, hey, I own a firearms company, or hey, I own a wet shaving company, or hey, whatever. I own a pen company if you're a fountain pen person or cigar person or any one of those niche hobbies. And if you're upfront about that, and then you don't flog your business every single time you speak, you'll be a lot better off.
Well, that brings up the question I was going to ask. And for anybody listening that's not familiar with Reddit, you have a user that's commenting on a specific thread, or they're replying to a comment. You can click on that user's profile and then see all the comments they've done in different communities. When you say with every time you're communicating, do you mean to where you're looking at it from the profile perspective, and it's that some of your posts may have like updates on product and other ones are just conversation? Or are you saying like no single comment should be all about your product or your brand?
Oh, no. You can have comments that are all about your product and your brand, so long as you respect any established rules that exist
Gotcha.
in whatever subreddit. Like I said, the wet shaving subreddit is very structured, very tightly controlled, and things that do not comply with the rules are deleted. But so long
Yeah.
as you respect the rules, you'll be fine. But I mean, like you can always talk about yourself so long as the purpose of your comment is not solely to advertise your own product or business.
Yeah.
I have long, and I take it a step further, I have long considered it to be poor form to recommend my own product or push people toward my own product. Primarily for that same reason, because there's always, for the reason I mentioned earlier, where I felt that people could accuse me of not being completely neutral, and neutrality and a disinterested character are very much things that are prized in these kinds of hobbyist fora. People
Mm-hmm.
want to know that you're one of them first and foremost. And so there's Dr. Robert Cialdini wrote a book called on the science of influence and the psychology of influence, and he says that there are 7 principles of influence, and one of them is unity. And basically, it's that person and I are alike. We have unifying characteristics. Therefore, I am more interested in hearing what that person has to say rather than some schlub I met on the street.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's good. And how much, it's your main driver. Reddit is your main driver. How much time do you say you spend each week engaging on Reddit? Or do you just feel like it's such a part of the business now, you don't even really, focus on that tracking of it?
Second one.
Just part of the business, part of it, that is your social media as well, right?
Yeah, it's a far more productive social media channel than any other one that we've tried.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily, I think because Barrister and Mann sort of grew up on Reddit and was built with the input of the Reddit wet shaving community. And so as a result, it's become such part and parcel of doing business that it's almost impossible to separate the two. Like if I were to suddenly get banned by Reddit tomorrow and all of the work that I've done and everything that I've contributed to Reddit over the last 10 years or so deleted, Barrister and Mann would take a very serious hit.
Does that scare you at all?
Not really. I don't. The thing is that I pick and choose what I say. I'm very careful about what I say.
Mm-hmm.
I will happily step in and explain, science or fragrance or history or whatever to people. I will correct them, but I am very careful otherwise about how I speak, when I speak, and where I speak.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, you go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that my father has repeated an old saying to me quite frequently, and that is silence makes no mistakes.
Well, there you go. There you go. And one thing that I feel like I've seen brands do in Facebook comments before is if there is doubt or question from a prospective customer about using the product, they will offer a discount, 10% off, 15% off, 20% off. Do you do that at all with Reddit, or do you say, hey, that's not, that's something that could be a slippery slope. I just focus on giving the education.
Yeah, I mean, like we don't do that as a matter of course, partly because it requires a bit of skill in order to use shaving soap, even if you use no other part of a wet shaving regimen. You do have to learn how to lather a soap, and that takes a couple of tries.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, my response if somebody's having trouble with the product is I'll ask them about it, either publicly or in private message. My preference is always to ask them publicly, because other people might be having that same problem, and they could maybe draw that same answer or a similar answer, or they can extrapolate it out. Again, because I am most of the customer service, I'm trying to maximize the use of my time as much as I can. So it has not ever really been my habit, if someone is having trouble, to offer them a discount. A lot of times what I will do is I will attempt to teach them and help them fix whatever's wrong. If they really don't like the product, I will just refund it. We cannot really accept returns because we have to assume that the product is contaminated. And so we would basically spend the money to get it back to us to destroy it, which doesn't make any sense. Whereas in the wet shaving community, there's a vibrant practice of trading shaving soaps and aftershaves and razors and brushes and such back and forth, selling or trading. I personally find that practice a little off-putting, but it is very much part of wet shaving's DNA. And so I give people their money back and I say, hey, go trade this with somebody for something you do like. If you need some help finding a buy-sell trade forum or, something of that nature, I'm happy to make some recommendations. So again, it's about facilitating what people already want to do as opposed to trying to make them do what I want them to do.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And as you are right now, Reddit is your main driver, but what would you say some of your biggest marketing opportunities or challenges are for the brand this year? And we're so close to 2024, just for the year ahead.
It's a challenge to convince people that wet shaving is really better. The way I have begun to think about wet shaving as a rule is that it's a form of masculine self-care. This is better for your skin than using, canned foam and a cartridge razor or an electric buzzer or whatever it is that most people use. It's a lot easier on your skin. It protects your skin a lot better. It doesn't dry out your skin or irritate your skin like most of those products do. And so there's a real educational gap, because wet shaving over the course of the last 50 years or so, as Gillette and Schick and various other companies have allowed safety razors and brush and mug shaving to decline, it has developed a reputation for being less good than the methods that we have now, which, as I said, nothing could be further from the truth. You get fewer ingrown hairs with wet shaving and a lot less razor burn, which is often what I tell people at the outset. Like, it may take a little bit of investment of skill, but you're just going to get a much better result. So our major marketing challenge has always been education, to the point that I am in the process of developing a series of videos that explain to people how to wet shave, why it's better, etc. And also, the other part of that is exposure. Just like how do we get in front of enough people and the right people to for our message to resonate with potential customers.
Yeah, I almost wonder, like, influencers, how they could play into that. But do you think it is more of, and I have the same question about stopping something like drug addiction. Do you think it is more
That's
of
a dark turn.
yeah, well, just bear with me for a second. Do you think it is more of educating and converting people that are already doing the other, or going down the age ladder to educating people that are just starting to shave?
I
You
think
know what I mean?
I think it's both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
It's more cultural inertia than it is anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times you'll have, young men who turn 18 and Gillette sends them a free razor and a pack of blades. And let's be honest, the shave is terrible. Because the proper way to shave is not to take 5 flimsy blades at a preset angle and drag them along your skin without any preparation or proper lubricant. It's just going to be a mess no matter what. And so a lot of times young men learn to hate shaving very quickly, and so they stop. And that continues kind of upward along the age chain. And so you'll have people who are, say, 40, 50, 60, who are like, oh my God, shaving is awful. I hate it. I've never had a good shave. Why would I ever want to try this? And so, yes, we absolutely are trying to move down the ladder a bit. But again, it's that same exposure problem where there's just like there are the two socially known ways to shave, right? There are buzzer, clipper, electric shavers, or there is, a cartridge razor and canned gel or Barbasol or whatever. And so
Mhm.
again, there's that same idea of exposure. How do we get in front of these people in the first place without burning millions in cash in the process?
Yeah, and I think too, I'm just kind of riffing with you at this point, but I think too, as the younger generations continue to grow up, it'll be helpful because you hear things like, um, I'm bad with generational terms. What's the current youngest generation right now? Gen
Gen
Z.
Alpha.
Okay, Gen Z. What age range is that? Like 18, 19?
Yeah, yeah, like 18 to like 25.
So you hear like people saying, "Oh, they're lazy. They don't want to work this or that." But if you think about like how time has progressed, and like 200 years ago, we would have been like walking across America to settle land. And like
Yep.
you didn't have time to really think about how you felt because you didn't want to die from an illness and you wanted to get land. And like even 100 years ago or 150 years ago, even 50 years ago, things were very different. So Gen Z and younger generations seem to be more self care, mental care focused. So maybe as you're saying that the shaving technique is better for your skin and better for your health, they might be more receptive to stop and listen to those types of things as
Right,
well.
right. Which is exactly why I have really rethought. I've rethought how we talk about what we do.
Mm,
And especially in the wake of the pandemic, because the rise of self care in general, but masculine self care in particular,
hmm
has been very precipitous. Like it spiked sharply. All of a sudden, people were stuck at home. Guys were stuck at home, and they were bored, and they had cash infusions from the federal government. And they're like,
hmm
okay, well, what do I do with this extra money? And some people were like, well, maybe I should learn to take better care of my skin. Maybe I should learn to take better care of my face. Maybe I should buy a home exercise machine or whatever. But people, when left to the company of themselves, take better care of themselves.
hmm
And because those are the only people they're with at the time. And
hmm
so that's caused me to completely rethink how we talk about wet shaving, because it's one thing to tell people that it's better, but it's hard to articulate. It's hard to make it resonate unless you talk about it in the form of it's better for you. Your skin will feel better. You will look better. You will smell better. You will feel,
hmm
and so the idea that it's masculine self-care, not only physically but also mentally, you're focusing intently on your face for about 15 minutes. It's got a certain ritualistic aspect, which a lot of people really like. I mean, like human beings in general are creatures of habit. We like
hmm
structure. That's why we build cities.
hmm
That's why we set up governments and religions and things. And so people like ritual. And there's a lot of ritual involved in what we do.
Yeah, and two, I mean, it takes shaving, tying a tie, things like that take normally a father or something to teach, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes there can not be that education in the home,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, even still just kind of riffing on now. I'm thinking of like SEO tactics for you, but I mean, even just like people are going to be searching how to stop the problems, like you shared about skin bumps, things like that,
Mhm.
right? So, I mean, those are that education I think will be huge. I'm a huge fan of education and marketing with things. So that's why we have this podcast. But
Yeah.
cool. So to summarize everything that we talked about today, we talked about quite a bit with Reddit, with your brand, but to put it all into a marketing mindset, what mindset should marketers or business owners have?
Remember that your customers are human beings and treat them as such. You have to engage with them as people before you do anything else.
Mm,
You can't look at them as just numbers. The first thing you should be doing when you're marketing to a group of people is put yourself in their position. How does what you're doing solve their problem? And how can you explain that to them in a way that doesn't come across like you're trying to get something out of them?
I love it. And for anyone listening that's at the stage of figuring out what they'd like to do in the marketing industry, what marketing role or roles do you think will have the highest demand in the next 3 to 5 years?
Having seen what ChatGPT and various other AI services are putting out these days, copywriting. I honestly believe that because truly great copy is not written by machine. Like we can look at things that are optimized and oh, it has this word versus this word, and it's this number of this number of sentences versus this number of sentences. But in 10 years in the trenches, my very best copy, my best converting copy has been copy that tells a story and paints a picture. And that does so vividly. You need to, people like stories. That's why, that's why the movie business makes billions of dollars every year. People like stories. You have to be able to tell people a story, and machines are not creative enough to be capable of that, at least for the time being. And I really sort of question the idea that they will be in the near future. And so truly great copy and truly great copywriting is made in the crucible of creativity and of a great story. And so I think that really great copywriters, people who know how to tell that story and paint that picture, will still be in very high demand.
Yeah, I think copy is important. I think automation, which we'll just bucket, ChatGPT under that for a moment, but automation knocks out lower qualified, strategist or specialist in a certain thing, but
Agreed.
increases the demand for the higher quality or higher skilled people for sure. Think about like photography and things like that. When we went from print to digital cameras and now Photoshop's out and all those things. So last question for you. Tell us, where can listeners connect with you and learn more about your business?
So
Other
the
than,
best way
I guess,
to,
Reddit.
oh, sorry.
I was going to say Reddit. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so there's Reddit. My Reddit screen name is Boston Photo Tourist, which is the result of the fact that I was when I started law school, I was wandering around the city just taking photos of Boston because I'd never lived in the city before. So you can always find me on Reddit. I will almost always answer your message so long as you were at least basically polite. You can also contact us through our Facebook page at Barrister and Mann. That's MANN, two N's as in Nathan. And that's the result of a stylized idea of the fact that it was for men originally. And now I consider it largely unisex. We also have Instagram under the same thing, Barrister and Mann. I had a Twitter or X or whatever for many years. Never really understood its value in the wet shaving world. Didn't really get a lot out of it. And now that Twitter's basically committing suicide, let's not even worry about that one. I just set up a TikTok, but I'll be honest with you, I am too old to understand TikTok that well, and so I've retained a firm to take care of that for us. But through our website at barristerandman.com, or on Reddit, or through Facebook or Instagram are really the best ways to reach me.
Well, Will, I appreciate you coming on today. I feel like I learned a lot about Reddit. So I think this was a great episode, and thanks for sharing it with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.